right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between Donald Trump and what's being done to Russell Brand this morning. I think I've got something interesting to cover on this one, so let's do this. And good morning. That's a little much. Yep, there we go. Now I'm in frame. Good morning. I see Dan got first blood this morning. I'm running a little behind because So okay, let me start with with what we're going to talk about. There's this. I got this Truth Social post from Donald Trump and a comment on Twitter about it. And that's basically the whole premise that we're going to dig into, where this person says, every day on Truth Social, Trump says the most lunatic, absurd, flatly authoritarian things, and nobody seems much to care because it's not Twitter. He's completely out of his mind. That he's leading a GOP poll is a disgrace. Okay. Charles on Twitter. Okay, this is a nothing account, but it's an interesting comment because there are people who share that opinion, and the opinion is not a particularly good one. It's not particularly well reasoned. So yesterday I talked about the Russell Brand situation, and like I said yesterday, Russell Brand may not be the martyr you want, but he's the one you've got. And the fact is that at the moment, Russell Brand is saying things that are pissing off the right people. And you know that because governments are conspiring to pressure private companies to economically assassinate this man. Right? A major piece of evidence in Brand's favor against any of these sexual misconduct allegations. And again, I'm not defending Russell Brand's actions. If he did wrong, he did wrong. And he shouldn't necessarily get away with that. But the fact is, what we have are mere allegations. We don't have any kind of evidence. We don't have any kind of trial. We don't have any of that. We have somebody said he did something. And by all accounts, so the things that he's accused of doing, with I think one exception, are not crimes, right? There's one, I believe one of the anonymous accusers said that he raped her up against a wall in his private home where she was in attendance voluntarily. Now, even there, I'm not saying that he could not have done anything wrong, right? Just because you went to a place where there was a reasonable expectation of a certain outcome doesn't mean that suffering that bad outcome is forgiven, right? That the perpetrator of that bad action should be forgiven. But at the same time, actions have consequences. And that's got to be part of the math as well. But in the case of the Russell Brand situation, what you have is unfounded allegations resulting in the financial ruination of a private citizen with no more than the say-so of accusers. And let's not forget, I believe it's the Sixth Amendment that gives you the right to face your accuser. And like I mentioned yesterday, Rand is British, right? Brand is British, but we assume in the drafting of our law that these rights are endowed by the Creator. The question, no matter where you live in the world, is not whether or not you have the rights, which are enumerated in the Constitution and in some cases assumed from the nebulous penumbra of unenumerated rights, to quote the Supreme Court. The question is whether or not you have a government that is adequately protecting those rights, as is the responsibility of any government to do. And if your government is not doing that, then under the American tradition, it is time to abolish that government and form a new government. So I want to bring you back around now. So that's what's happening to Russell Brand, is he's being accused unfairly. The statement made by this Charles Cook guy on Twitter says, every day on Truth Social, Trump says the most lunatic, absurd, flatly authoritarian things. Note, he didn't say here that anything is false. So let's look at the actual statement by Donald Trump. They are almost all dishonest and corrupt, but Comcast, with its one-sided and vicious coverage by NBC News, and in particular MSNBC, often incorrectly referred to as MSDNC, Democrat National Committee, should be investigated for its country-threatening treason. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and talk about that for a minute. So he makes a reference to the MSDNC, and let's be real. With the exception of maybe Fox News, which should, by all accounts, be considered an ally of the enemy at this point, every major news outlet in this country, especially those with a major television and cable television presence, is little more than a propaganda wing for the corrupt Democrat National Committee. That's not in question. No reasonable person refutes that, and no person can intelligently repudiate that claim. That's just not an option. So we look at the coverage by these media groups since the original announcement of Trump's presidency, and we find hoax after hoax after hoax. Right, you've got the Mattress Girl hoax, you've got the Jussie Smollett hoax, you've got the Ukraine phone call hoax, you've got the Russia hoax, you've got the Catholic schoolboys, the Nick Sandmann, I forget the name of the school, but that was a hoax, right? You've got the Bubba Wallace noose on the garage door hoax after hoax after hoax. So Trump refers to that as country-threatening treason. Let's not forget about the hoaxes, the intentional lies surrounding the COVID event, right? Now, I know, and you probably know, of people who died at least with COVID, and likely some who actually died from COVID. COVID was, in fact, a serious disease. The hoax, however, was that it was never as serious as we were originally led to believe. I attended a GOP event last night, and there was a presenter there. I'm not gonna say her name on the show just yet, because I approached her afterwards and we traded cards, and I'm going to try to get together with her to produce her presentation. But there's a lot of information that she has compiled from publicly available records that suggest that not only was COVID not as bad as they tried to tell us it was, but that the publicly available data from the CDC and the World Health Organization prior to the coverage going the way that it did in 2020 made it very, very clear that basically the disease was never as bad as they said it was. You know, your chances of dying with COVID, your chances of dying with COVID, not even making the distinction between from and with, that is an important distinction, but your chances of dying and COVID being listed as the cause of death were lower at every point throughout the pandemic than your chances of dying from heart disease or cancer. That Ben's asking no YT. Steve's watching on YT, so I don't know what's going on there. So yeah, y'all let me know. Y'all let me know if you're not seeing it there. I see 3-4 people watching on YT, and it looks like everybody else is on Facebook and Rumble. Which, hey, if you ever don't see us on YouTube, we're on Rumble. Xandermax says, it's one thing to call them on their lies and expect them to be held to a higher standard, and I'm not entirely sure what his threat here is, but it doesn't seem good for a candidate for president that swears notes to the Constitution, including the First Amendment. Oh, that swears an oath to the Constitution, including the First Amendment. Yes. Okay, so, Alex, you're absolutely correct. And so here's where this does not comport with the accusation made by the commenter there. So he says their endless coverage of the now fully debunked scam known as Russia, and much else, like I just listed, and Sergeant Major mentioned, don't forget about the black professor who used fraudulent data to support his theory of systemic racism. And yeah, to clarify, that professor falsified data to support not just his theory of systemic racism, but the original root theory on which all of academia bases its claims that there is an extant system of racism in this country. And by merely reading the law, it's very clear that the closest thing that exists in this country to a systemic racism in policy as a matter of codified law is what we refer to as the affirmative action and anything related to that. There are laws which codify the exclusionary treatment of white men, but such laws do not exist for anybody else. The argument is that white men have an easier path. And I've lived in an extended stay hotel while I tried to build up a nest egg with a buddy to get ourselves into a house and start building some kind of a future, and then and done. I've worked, right? Believe it or not, you can work and earn something. You can build a thing. So Trump says, I say up front, openly and proudly, that when I win the presidency of the United States, they and others of the lamestream media will be thoroughly scrutinized for their knowingly dishonest and corrupt coverage of people, things, and events. Why should NBC or any other of the corrupt and dishonest media companies be entitled to use the very valuable airwaves of the USA free? They are a true threat to democracy and are, in fact, the enemy of the people. The fake news media should pay a big price for what they have done to our once great country. Alex, you're absolutely correct. The First Amendment is a part of the Constitution to which the president, once he is elected again, will have to swear an oath to uphold and defend. Our tradition of law in the United States and the common tradition of English common law does hold that even as a free speech absolutist, there are lines, and those lines have to do with fraud. So it seems very much to me like what Donald Trump says here, without being so delicately careful with his legal speech, he does say very clearly, I say up front openly and proudly, they and others of the lamestream media will be thoroughly scrutinized for their knowing, dishonest, and corrupt coverage of people, things, and events. Because what that press has done, and this is true also in the case of Russell Brand as a recent example, is they have used the mask, the facade of free speech in order to defame individuals, right, and defraud the American people. For example, Rachel Maddow famously repeated over and over and over again that the vaccine was 100% effective. That to have the vaccine was to be guaranteed that you could not get the disease and that you could not spread the disease. We now know conclusively that that statement was so untrue and that it was so well known to be untrue that those vaccines, that original vaccine, and I believe its three most immediate predecessors, or antecedents rather, have been removed from the market, have been pushed off by the FDA and are no longer available. It's also the case that the original strain apparently is extinct. There's a whole rabbit hole worth of information to go down there that's all very top of mind right now because I attended such a very clear and well-made presentation on that topic, which I'll be publishing that presentation sometime the next day or three, as soon as I get the time to edit it. But like I mentioned earlier, I'm talking to that presenter about producing her presentation. Basically, the presentation was in a public hall. She's a very good presenter, but we're basically looking at a projector slide on a white screen. It looks like crap in the video. So I want to produce it and actually have her slides and all that set up. Xander Mack points out, and the networks are subject to civil litigation for that. Do you think that's what Trump is alluding to, or do you think he's alluding to using the power of government to try to hurt them? I think that's what Trump is alluding to. I think that's what he means. That's very much what he means. He says the lamestream media will be thoroughly scrutinized for their knowingly dishonest and corrupt coverage of people, things, and events. That sounds to me like launching an investigation to examine the obvious fraudulent coverage that these mainstream media outlets, in clear collusion with the Democrat Party, which we know to have paid for the fraudulent production of illicit evidence for the purposes of conducting election interference and then conducting espionage and political interference with a sitting president. Right? So no intelligent person can say that the Democrat National Committee and the individual candidates therewith associated have not been actively involved with and, in fact, funded acts of fraud in conspiracies to defraud the American people in collusion with foreign powers, by the way. And to suggest that MSNBC, NBC, CNN, and the like have not been not only privy to that, but in fact involved directly with that, would be a very, very naive understanding of all the evidence that is available to examine here. So let me go back and remind you that where we started with this, based on everything I explained about how there's obvious corruption, there's obvious fraud, and the language that Donald Trump uses here, where he says, they and others of the lamestream media will be thoroughly scrutinized for their knowingly dishonest and corrupt coverage of people, things, and events. The accusation here is that every day on Truth Social, Trump says the most lunatic, absurd, and flatly authoritarian things. Flatly authoritarian things. What could be more flatly authoritarian than conducting an organized campaign of fraud in order to vitiate the jurisprudence of our election system? And remember, I say that advisedly based on the Time magazine article referring to the shadowy cabal that was used to, quote unquote, fortify the 2020 election. The idea that election was a clean election. I mean, on the numbers alone, we've got more voters voting than we have registered voters. And if that doesn't get your hackles up and make you look around, then you're not paying attention. So what Trump is talking about here, I can see how a careful and devious mind could twist the reasonable application of the law to sound like an authoritarian attack. But the fact of the matter is that the child mutilating psychopath left has taken such abusive command of all of our major institutions, from media to academia to even medicine, that we're talking about valuable institutions which have now been bent to serve exclusively in the furtherance of a destructive narrative whose only clear purpose is to bring an end to the American experiment. They seek to destroy liberty and prosperity. And at the end of the day, it really is as simple as the left. The left can be divided into two camps. The voters who want something for nothing, who at their moral core believe that anyone having something is sufficient moral justification for the use of violence and force to take something from someone. At the very core of the leftist position is that you should be forced under duress and threat of violence to surrender your life or some degree thereof, your time, your property, your earnings, your savings, your value, your worth. And then the other category of the left are their elected officials, who at their core believe that if you are not one of them, right, you're not one of the Ivy League club, the elite club, that you are not intelligent or valuable enough to be trusted with your own decision making, to be trusted with your own life choices. That the extent to which you can be trusted is that you can be trusted to receive what chattels the government should deign to crumble onto the floor for you, and then you should be trusted to consume those sufficiently that you can be engaged for menial labor. The Democrat Party, quite simply, is now, has always been, and intends to remain the party of slaveholding. It's that simple. They want you to be no more than minimally sufficiently educated wage slaves, tax slaves. Why else do you think it is impossible to own land under the law? As long as there are property taxes, I mean, I can go logically down this path with all taxes, but most especially as long as there are property taxes, then you cannot truly be free. Right? And when I say that, understand it like this. With the exception of property tax, to some degree, all other taxation, with the exception of property and estate tax, which should be considered to be about the same, all other taxation is to some degree dependent on voluntary engagement, right? So if I could buy a piece of land and work that land, hunt game on that land, grow crops on that land, draw water from a well on that land, and shit in the woods, right? And, just either choose to not have electricity or put in a solar panel system to generate my own electricity, be completely disconnected, right, and have the choice to not engage, then I would be able to choose not to earn income on which I had to pay income taxes. I would be able to choose not to purchase goods on which I would pay sales taxes, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? If I want booze, I grow potatoes and I distill vodka, or grow wheat and distill beer, whatever, right? But you don't even have that. You cannot choose to be self-sufficient. Now, I would abolish all taxes generally and make the government get a goddamn job. But at the very most base level, you cannot reasonably argue that you are in a free country so long as, at a minimum, property tax is not abolished. I'm not entirely sure how I got off on that particular rabbit hole, but it's a good rabbit hole, and it's probably a good place to put a pin in this one because it is 8 o'clock and it's time to go shoot some houses. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. Sorry I kind of slapped this one together at the last minute. That event that I went to last night with Pitt Danny, I didn't get home till almost midnight, so I overslept this morning. I didn't roll out of bed until like 6 o'clock. That's a rare thing for me. I'm usually up between, somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning. So y'all be safe out there. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.